Hi, welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Liz Cavell, Associate Counsel at the Freedom from Religion Foundation here in Madison, Wisconsin.
And I'm Mark Dan, Director of Governmental Affairs at FFRF in Washington, D.C. On today's show, we have two guests who have had front row seats to Trump's packing the courts, how McConnell has championed these efforts, and what the Biden administration plans to do to rebalance the courts. With us today is Jen Bendery, a senior politics reporter for the Huffington Post. She's covered Congress, the courts, and the White House for the Huffington Post since 2011. She previously reported on Congress for 4 years at Roll Call, a Capitol Hill newspaper, and spent 4 years covering the Texas legislature for Gallery Watch in Austin, Texas. She can be found on Twitter at jbendery. Also with us today is Lena Zwarensteyn. She is the Fair Courts Senior Director at the Leadership Conference Educational Fund and the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, which is a coalition of more than 220 national organizations committed to promoting and protecting the civil and human rights of all persons in the United States. FFRF is a proud member of the Leadership Conference, and one of the Leadership Conference's founders was A. Philip Randolph, a noted freethinker. Lena advocates for fair courts and, in particular, judges committed to civil and human rights. She has led numerous lower court and Supreme Court nomination fights, which FFRF has participated in, including the fights of many of Trump's 234 lifetime judges, such as Supreme Court Justices Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett. She can be found on Twitter at Lena Zwarensteyn. We're thrilled to have both of you here. Please note that Lena doesn't identify as a non-believer, and Jen is an agnostic who feels very at peace in nature. They're both great friends of the program, and we're honored to have them here.
And yes, so excited about our guests today. And as always, if you have questions for Jen or Lena or anything about what we talk about today, you can post them in the Facebook comments, or you can send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. Just a friendly disclaimer, as always, FFRF is a 501c3. We are nonpartisan. So not only do we happily accept donations that are tax deductible, we do not and cannot take sides in partisan elections. So we're not necessarily endorsing any partisan views that are expressed here. But of course, we are talking about the packing of the judiciary by the Trump administration and what that is going to be doing to transform issues that our supporters care about. So today we are talking about the courts, and FFRF, like a lot of other organizations, last year published a report discussing the threat to secular government that is facing us thanks to the packing of the federal judiciary with ultra-conservative judges who many or most of whom share a Christian nationalist worldview. And so we're going to talk about that today with the help of Jen and Lena, who bring some really interesting perspectives to the conversation. So, Mark.
Wonderful. Well, Lena, to kick things off, historically, the religious right has been more energized on judges than other voters. Yet that seems to be changing. What's causing that change?
Well, I'm most excited about this change, and I'll sort of talk about that before going back to some of the underpinnings. So in the most recent exit polling on the presidential election, 60% of voters said Supreme Court nominations were an important factor in their vote. And of those, 52% voted for Biden to be the one who they thought could deliver on the types of Supreme Court nominees they want to see. That is a big shift, as you just mentioned, from what we've seen in the past. So historically, in response to the civil rights movement and the progress that has been made with things like the Voting Rights Act and more, there was a concerted effort in order to really transform key areas of our government and our society. One way was to look specifically at the federal judiciary. So if you've probably ever heard me talk, which hopefully many of you have not, but if you have, you've probably heard me talk about the Powell Memo in 1971. So this was written by then, a couple months later, Supreme Court Justice Powell for the Chamber of Commerce. And it was talking about ways in which that more of the quote unquote free market and business community could organize often in response to a lot of the progress that had been made in the civil rights movement specifically. And one of the pillars to that change was specific to the federal judiciary. It was seen to be a lot easier to secure a few lifetime appointments on our federal courts, which we'll be talking about a lot more now, than it would be to do even bigger holistic social change or movements and so on. So finding those specific pillars was really important. But we have seen a real infrastructure grow up and out of that. So probably most notoriously is the Federalist Society, which has been around for now quite a few decades, whose entire project has really been to take a small segment of the legal community, the really ultra-conservative section of the legal community, and really infusing it into various aspects of our law, whether it is just getting lawyers who are pursuing anti-civil rights and other types of litigation or serving on the bench and so on. And to their credit, they've been immensely successful. What we have seen happen in the Trump administration is really the fruition of those decades long of work. But the leaders of the Federalist Society, I think, have been an important part of this story, especially when it comes to the religious right and the ultra-conservative. There have been leaders who understood that there are particular issues that could be easily galvanized around that then, maybe not when the Powell memo was even written, but over time has been one where this religious right has grown up. One obvious area is abortion. And so being able to talk to people about abortion in a specific area and then connect that to the courts has been incredibly effective for the Federalist Society. And Leonard Leo, who is seen as one of the really important influencers and staff members previously in the Federalist Society, was an important senior advisor to the Trump administration. There's a lot written about him if you want to Google him, specifically when it comes to a lot of the civil rights, but especially around abortion and the ways in which to really capture this religious right and try to motivate them to act on the courts. But as we started, this is changing. We do want to see more equal justice in our country. And I think more people are connecting the issues they care about to the role that judges in our courts play. We have a long way to go to fix it, but it seems like we're in the right path to getting there.
Wonderful. And if you have questions for Jen Bendery from the Huffington Post or Lena Zwarensteyn from the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, ask them in the Facebook comments or send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. Jen, as we turn to the current state of play and what's happening in Congress right now, we know Trump was able to confirm 3 Supreme Court justices, 54 appeals court justices, 174 district court judges, 3 judges on the Court of International Trade. Many of these judges are unabashed Christian nationalists who have been vetted by the Federalist Society, who have a profound impact on the separation of state and church and religious exemptions that can provide a legalized route for discrimination. So, are we doomed?
Go.
No, I would say that America is doomed. I guess it depends on how you define doomed. But, it's important to look both at the people that Trump put into the courts, but also the effect that they really have on the courts and the broader system. So you're right that Trump confirmed more than 230 federal judges lifetime. That includes Supreme Court justices, appeals court judges, district court judges. And you're also correct that a number of them are members of the Federalist Society and hold pretty extreme, they're like part of the right-wing part of the Catholic world. So very anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ rights, more traditional values. There are a lot of these judges on the court now, and they are in lifetime posts. But remember, at the district court level, if these, I want to make sure I'm clear on this. District judges, they will individually rule on a case. And if this was a Trump judge who was particularly extreme in a ruling, that case would likely go to an appeals court where a panel of judges would rule on it and potentially overrule what this judge said. On the appeals court, which Trump and Mitch McConnell focused intensely on filling during Trump's tenure, those judges will be on a panel of judges when they take up cases. So there is sort of an inherent checks and balances within the courts to make sure that even one president's Pence 4-year push on judges doesn't therefore remake the entire court system. It's just influencing it, but not destroying our court system. So to answer your question on whether we're doomed in terms of judges upholding the separation of church and state, I guess I would say the answer is no. We believe in a fair judicial system, just that Trump's judges have certainly tilted ideology on the courts to the right.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think what's so alarming about not only how truly ultra conservative the views are of the judges that have been vetted by the Federalist Society and, you know, handpicked by them to be plugged into these seats on the federal bench. It's the pace, right? It's just a numbers game. It's how doomed are we? Well, out of this many spots, this many have been filled by Trump judges who have been, by and large, extreme. So just to give some context, we know that, and it's not even 53 anymore. By the time our report was published in early December, or from that time through the lame duck session, the number of judges appointed by Trump has increased. But in our report, we had at the same time, or just first-term circuit court, appellate court appointments by president. Trump made 50. I had 53. I think it's now 54. Obama in that same period of time had 30, and George W. Bush had 35. So Trump has just completely outpaced former presidents in terms of how much impact he's been able to have in such a short period of time. And so it's just tipping the odds that one of these ultra-conservative judges or two are going to be on a 3-judge panel or are going to be the one drawn to rule on these important cases from the district courts. So it's just a really sort of alarming kind of tilt of the courts towards the ultra-conservative side of all of these issues that the public is not necessarily in line with the Federalist Society on.
So how do we stop being doomed? What are there vacancies that are coming up?
So I suppose I would question the premise of your question. I mean, what is doomed? It's really dark. On the one hand, if you're concerned about lifetime federal judges having particularly extreme ideological opinions tilted against women's rights, LGBTQ rights, voting rights, civil rights, yeah, that would be not a good feeling to know what Trump just did. But again, these judges are just part of the court system. I don't think that they're going to sway the entire court to doom. And Biden has an opportunity to tilt things back in the other direction. He certainly signaled that he will move fast to do that, and he's ready to put a pretty incredible mix of diverse people on the courts from all kinds of backgrounds to ideologically tilt the way our courts collectively think, but then to be more reflective of Americans, the American community at large, not just this very small subset of hardline, ideological, right-wing judges that the Federalist Society put on the court. So it's kind of a moving, living creature, the courts, that I feel like in terms of constantly changing and shifting, and think about it as doomed.
I like your optimism. I appreciate
and
that.
I might add, let me just add one thing, because I get this question a lot, like, well, we're screwed. Like, Trump just redid all the courts and all these people on there now. One thing that I think is true, and it remains to be seen with Trump's judges because it's so early, is that oftentimes judges, once they are confirmed and on the bench, they take their jobs very seriously, and they may not behave as judges as they behaved before they were judges. They take their job very seriously in terms of upholding the law, and of course they interpret it through their lens of experience. But there are judges who seemed more hardline in their prior interactions when they became a judge, and then they're a bit more measured. take it seriously, fairness, and real pride in being a judge. So I think that's an important piece to remember with judges, generally speaking.
So do you think Senator Graham was correct that, there was so much hoopla over judges, and it turns out that may not have panned out? So do you think people were right in being very critical about prospective judges and nominees?
I mean, the judges that Trump put up collectively certainly stand out from other presidents' judges. They were overall more ideological, more, they're not even necessarily conservative, because you can go back and look at conservative judges from W. Bush or Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush. What was unique about Trump judges is that they were ideologues. They held very firm to the same belief system that many, if not all, of the federal society member judicial nominees have, which is a basic agreement that they are very against abortion rights, very personally opposed to LGBTQ rights, they have records of opposing voting rights, women's rights. I mean, there's a pretty consistent theme ideologically to the people that Trump put on there. So that is some cause for concern if you care about civil rights. And his judges are also very young. And so unlike Obama's judges, for example, a bunch of Trump's judges they were confirmed in their 30s, lifetime appointments. So we've got some of these young, ideological, anti all the civil rights issues I just listed off on the courts for like 40 years. So that's what we're looking at right now in terms of what Biden is going to have to try to offset.
Can I jump in here?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be doing this work if I thought we were doomed. At least I hope not. But I really do think what we have seen Jen has underlined some of the ways in which we have seen a significant number of really extreme ideologues nominated and selected by this president, enabled by Mitch McConnell and others, get through. And just as some example, dozens of the nominees refused to even state that Brown versus Board of Education, the landmark civil rights case that ended legal apartheid in our public education system, they refused to say that it was correctly decided. Many of them, as Jen mentioned, are folks who were at the forefront of voter suppression efforts, whether that is in defending what was called the monster voter suppression law in North Carolina. Many have said that Roe versus Wade is always wrong, is unconstitutional, it should be overturned. Many have been at the forefront of LGBTQ inequality and trying to make sure things like marriage equality is rolled back and so on and so forth. And it is because of those records that they have been nominated. And I have some optimism that over time, some of these judges do take their jobs more seriously. But the reason why we at the Leadership Conference and so many in our coalition care so much is that the records aren't always 100% predictive of where they will be, but it certainly shows the life view and the disposition and what they've been exposed to and the experiences they've had before maybe being confirmed to that bench. And that is incredibly telling for a few reasons. One, judges are fact finders. What facts do they look to? What is the type of evidence that they look at? Folks may remember Wendy Vitter was nominated for a district court seat in Louisiana. She perpetuated a lot of misinformation, specifically around reproductive health care access and abortion, perpetuating a lot of really bad information that was wrong on things like health care. That is really, really important to understanding what kind of discretion that they might exercise in terms of what they're looking at, what they determine as facts, and so on. But there is also the cumulative impact, the fact that Trump has selected and the Senate has confirmed, in the Trump administration, 30% of the circuit court judges, as you mentioned, that's 30%. The cumulative impact of that is pretty significant. So I don't want to completely understate that, but over the next few decades, you never know exactly which cases a judge is going to get, but we will definitely be seeing the impact of this. We've already seen one with a ruling that happened from a Trump district court judge in Texas regarding DACA specifically. These judges are really important in terms of determining the types of policies that could potentially be upheld or not upheld. It's not quite always as simple as, well, is it against the law or isn't it? There's a lot of discretion that's involved and a lot of fact finding. So hopefully we're not doomed. We're doing this. We have a huge opportunity. Our courts certainly were founded to protect a lot of special interests, including and especially white supremacy and others, that we have a huge burden and obligation to fix. And so that is something that this administration is tasked and we are expecting them to do. Hopefully with the Senate majority, we will also be able to see a lot more opportunity, not only rebalance, but to really try to fix some of those basic inequities in the courts, both in terms of the types of records folks have when they come onto the bench, but then also really important demographic diversity, which the Trump administration completely rolled back in his time in office.
Great. So, Lena, before Amy Coney Barrett was nominated to the Supreme Court, she was nominated to the Court of Appeals in 2017. During that lower court hearing, Senator Feinstein from California said to Barrett, "The dogma lives loudly within you because of Coney Barrett's right-wing writings and activities. Feinstein's line has become a badge of honor for conservatives battling what they see as anti-religious bias." Yet what Feinstein said was accurate. FFRF and the Leadership Conference reached the same conclusion: Coney Barrett will be anything but a fair-minded judge. How do we get out of this trap conservatives have laid down?
Well, I think it really does reflect what you're talking about, looking at the records and what somebody has said and done to determine whether or not they can be fair-minded. And so whether that is, deeply held personal or religious views and how that informs what they have done, it's incredibly important that senators continue to ask and question whether or not that those personally, deeply held beliefs, whether they be religious or non-religious specifically, whether or not they can set that aside to be a fair-minded judge. Would they be able to fully evaluate the facts in front of them, no matter who comes in front of them? And I think, what we had seen in Amy Coney Barrett's record, at the time this was said, she was being elevated to a seat on the Seventh Circuit. Not elevated. She was being nominated to a seat on the Seventh Circuit from her time in academia. And she has an extensive record talking about specifically being a Catholic and what that means in terms of her legal views. And so it is really important that we look very closely at everybody's record. Certainly someone can be of faith or not of faith, so much and be fair-minded. And it's really important to be asking the questions based on the actions and wordings that they have done in order to get there.
Great. And Jen, Biden and Schumer have said that they will prioritize judges. What politically do Biden and Schumer need to do to prioritize them?
They need to start moving. Like, they literally just need to start doing it. There's a whole process to confirming judges. The first step is the White House soliciting recommendations from senators for vacancies in their home states to fill those seats. Once they get recommendations from senators, they vet them thoroughly. They all come to agreement that they agree on the nominees that the White House will nominate. The White House formally nominates them. And from there, the Senate takes over, ushers them through the confirmation hearings, puts them on the Senate floor, and they get confirmed. So here in February, it's a little early to start seeing nominations coming out, but certainly the sense that I get from this White House is that they are working very quickly to line up a queue of judicial nominees to start nominating them, because they've learned a couple of things on the need to go fast here. First of all, the last 4 years under Trump and the Trump-McConnell partnership in confirming judges, I think has left Democrats angry and eager to push back on what just happened, which was a huge push on filling their vacancies at all costs. So 4 years later, Democrats are looking back. They barely control the Senate. They control the White House. And they're ready to push back on what they just experienced. In addition to that, I think that Biden's team understands one of the mistakes that Obama made in his first term in office, which is he was slow to start confirming judges. And it hurt him down the road because in addition to facing nonstop obstruction in the Senate from Mitch McConnell and other Republicans for confirming his judges, he just lost time in the beginning, and it hurt his final count on the courts. So here we are now in the Biden administration with a lot of the same people who worked in the Obama administration on confirming judges, and they have a few reasons not to get moving fast, and they understand the system very well. Joe Biden was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee for many years. Some of the staff in the White House worked with him on that committee. These are like people who are so well positioned to get this process going ASAP. And every indication that I've seen behind the scenes is that they know this and that they're already doing it. So Chuck Schumer's role is just to wait for these recommendations to start, or the nominations to start coming out, and then funneling them to the committee. But he's not doing anything until he gets nominations sent to the Senate.
Right. And one of our supporters over email is asking for both of you, so what can people do on the grassroots level to make sure that state church activists are doing to ensure our elected officials prioritize rebalancing the courts?
Lena, would you like to go?
Yeah. There's a lot that can be done. Honestly, one thing that I think is really exciting is that more people are caring, and you even asking the question is an incredible sign. There's a lot you can do. Obviously, if you don't live in DC or any of the territories, you have senators. Senators play an integral role both in filling the vacancies that exist in the state. As Jen mentioned, senators will often, help make those recommendations to the White House. Talking to them about those specific vacancies and what your expectations are is incredibly vital. For us at the Leadership Conference, we want to only see nominees who have a demonstrated commitment to civil rights, people who are fair-minded, have a progressive vision of the Constitution and law, and are reflective of the vast diversity of our country, both in terms of demographics, lived experiences, and their profession within the legal community. And so making sure your priorities are also communicated is important. Asking them how quickly they will move on those nominees and telling them that you expect them to move fast is also important. But senators play a huge role also in the cumulative impact of the courts generally. So every single time they vote on a nominee, even if it is not for a nominee that is in, let's say you live in Arizona, a nominee that would sit in Arizona, it still will impact you because the decisions that a lot of these lifetime federal judges make go far beyond the specific person who is in their courtroom. So talking to them about the cumulative impact and the fact that you expect them to only confirm those nominees who uphold those values, I think is really important. The number of phone calls we have seen on nominees that have garnered significant opposition, and I want to thank everybody who was involved in a lot of those efforts, whether that was on Brett Kavanaugh or Amy Coney Barrett specifically, or any of those dozens and dozens of lower court nominees that were especially appalling during the Trump administration. Calling them regularly is important because I think that is they take a look at the volume. Another thing that I think is really helpful is talking to your friends and family about that. I know maybe I'm invited to less parties because this is pretty much all I talk about these days, but continue to talk to your families and friends about this because I think it's super important to do so. And you can do so in a variety of ways using your social media and also writing letters to the editor or op-eds about this and framing this really for your community about what you expect our federal judiciary to look like and be like and the ways in which we can fix this so that equal justice means something for everybody in this country.
Lena, I wonder if you could talk about, after the whole kind of Barrett confirmation being rammed through and the hypocrisy of the way the past few SCOTUS vacancies have been filled, there's been so much talk about, drastic legislative action and reforms. But I'm wondering, as the dust is settling and we're moving into new leadership in government, what do you see as really possible in terms of not just filling the vacancies that exist, but reforms? What do you think is actually possible, and how can activists be involved in that?
I love the question. Our courts no doubt need to be modernized, and they need to be fixed. We don't think we want to go back to a system where there was perpetuating injustice. So how are ways that we can actually go about fixing that? And the first is what Jen mentioned. To be honest, it's not easy sometimes to fill those vacancies that currently exist. The biggest shift we can do is to fill these seats that we currently have, and there are more than 5 at the circuit court level, I believe more than 50 now at the district court level. So there's real opportunity that currently exists. And if this administration and Senate majority make that a priority, that is huge, because ideally they are only putting folks in, and this is what we're expecting, folks who have that commitment to civil and human rights and who are much more reflective of the communities in which they'd be serving. But then these other bigger, more modernization efforts. One is really easy. It is something that is an HR 1 or S1, the For the People Act, which is to expand the code of ethics to Supreme Court justices. That currently isn't a thing. So that's a starting point. But there's a lot of other types of more transparency and ethics reforms that can happen. But there is a real opportunity, as we talk about modernizing the courts, to expand the number of judgeships. We haven't seen the number of judgeships expand significantly since the early 90s. It is time we look at caseloads. We really look at communities to make sure the benches are reflective of the incredible diversity that exists there, and we do something about it. And so that means adding district court seats and circuit court seats. And it seems like, by all accounts, there is bipartisan support for that. Senator Young from Indiana, Republican senator, had supported such an effort last fall. Hopefully we will see more of that going in, because courts exist everywhere in the country. So it's really important that they be staffed and have the number of judgeships that we can ideally fill with fair-minded folks in the future. But then there is, of course, the big issue of the Supreme Court, which is, we have seen that the Trump administration had the opportunity to fill and steal 2 out of the 3 at Supreme Court seats that they filled. One, by Mitch McConnell denying Merrick Garland, the now Attorney General nominee, a seat on the Supreme Court. But then also, denying Justice Ginsburg's last wish, most fervent wish, that the next president nominate the replacement for her. And so there really is need to look at all the different types of reforms on the table, whether that is term limits and or Supreme Court expansion, really understanding exactly what we need to do to make sure all courts at all levels really reflect our country in all of the ways possible, in terms of caseload, so that we're not denying people access to the courtrooms, that we also are looking at diversity and representation on the bench.
Great. And if you have questions for Jen Bendery from the Huffington Post or Lena Zwarensteyn from the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, ask them in the Facebook comments or send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
Yeah.
A little more on judicial.
Sorry, Mark. Can I just jump in with one of those questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a crowd question here is, do you think Trump really cared about the ideological issues, or was he simply letting the Federalist Society kind of do the picking and draw up a list? And I'm going to kind of frame this in a different way, which is because the answer is definitely B, obviously. Federalist Society draws up a list, and Trump says, I like the looks of that one. But I do think an important kind of corollary to this question is, what's motivating the people, the Leonard Leos and the Federalist Society to draw up this list? What are the motivations behind, other than the obvious, the ideological piece and the things that are, easily kind of sellable to the ultra conservative or the conservative Christian movement? What's motivating the Federalist Society, and what's the progressive sort of antidote to that, or what's the other side of that?
Well, there's a lot there. I think that what's motivating the Federalist Society is they want like-minded people to blanket the court to affect laws to benefit themselves. So whether that's from an ideological standpoint on issues of abortion rights or all the civil rights, that's one. But also, these are judges who, based on their past records, tend to rule in favor of corporations and tend to rule but not pin down decisions as lower court judges or as academics or their careers. They just sided with a little guy. So there's a clear theme there to what these judges are bringing to the courts. And these are all judges for the Federalist Society. So that's where they're going with this. If they want to, try to control a certain branch of government, the judicial branch, you blanket it with people who will strongly support the same belief systems that you have that benefit yourself. And that's where Leonard Leo comes in. The vice president, executive vice president at the Federal Society, Leonard Leo has picked, I think at this point, 5 of the Supreme Court justices that we currently have. He personally helped to select and or confirm 5 of the 9. And I have to double check my notes, but I think it's 5. That would be John Roberts, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. Those are all Federal Society members. Those were all in some way chosen by and confirmed with the help of Leonard Leo. This is over the course of decades. There's a very strategic, long-term effort underway here to populate very powerful courts with Federal Society members. And this is something that conservatives have been working on for decades. And Democrats just have stopped, frankly, at doing something that counters it. They've just never quite focused on shaping the courts like conservatives have. I'm not sure why. They just have focused more on other issues. And they're also traditionally not as good at getting the public as engaged in court rights and judicial nomination rights. And the Supreme Court is where people pay any attention to the courts because it's the big court at the top. But there's all these appeals courts and all these district courts that are handing down rulings that have judges on them, that many of them have come from the Federalist Society. And especially on the appeals court, many of them were recommended to Trump by the Federal Society and Leonard Leo to fill 50-something appeals court seats that just got filled in the last year. So when you consider the long-term, far-reaching effects of what the Federal Society has been working on, and then you pair it with Mitch McConnell in the Senate to agree to funnel these people through quickly, and then you throw Trump on top, who doesn't really care about the ideology of these people, he just wants to have big numbers. It was the perfect storm for completely sweeping the court for 4 years. So that's kind of where we're at. I honestly forgot the question at this point. Ultimately, what we're talking about comes back to that is what has been happening for many, many years. It just peaked under the Trump administration.
Right.
And that's the starting point that anybody who cares about the court is looking at with Biden now.
Right. So it's kind of like when we say what's motivating it. Is it truly just this hardline ideology? And it sounds like it's maybe an overlapping of the ideology, but also a big piece is the moneyed interests and the corporate interests versus the little guy interests. And there's some overlap there, and the ideological piece gives a lot of political sell. And so it's been kind of like a successful combination. And we know that progressives haven't focused on this fight to the detriment of all of us over the decades. And so is there sort of is there like a sweet sauce on the other side that really can respond to the Federalist Society project?
Yeah, I think that there are a number of organizations that are tackling that. Obviously, Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Leadership Conference, the American Constitution Society, Alliance for Justice, People for the American Way, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Nationalist Law Center, a lot of folks. And what I think is, really amazing about this side is that once people understand how the issue that they care about, whether that is access to health care, connects with the courts, they care a lot more about it. So I think we have a lot more work to do that. I think that the Kavanaugh nomination really illustrated that. I think certainly the Amy Coney Barrett nomination illustrated that. But when I think about the motivations, I I do think Trump had a significant interest himself in the courts. One, he's in the courts constantly in his personal and professional capacity. He just wants to see the courts always rule for him. And when he was running for president in 2016, he did it because of the short list he had. He wanted to shore up his conservative bona fides. People didn't trust him to follow through on the issue that they seemed to care the most about, which was the federal court. So he put out that Supreme Court short list for who he would select to put in this on the Supreme Court should, which unfortunately was ultimately successful when Mitch McConnell denied Merrick Garland even a hearing to go through that. And Trump was happy to do that, and then I think knew he could not deviate from the Federalist Society because they got him there. And then you're right, he could then go along, okay, here's the short list. He could get advice from Leonard Leo and so on about who he thought could play the role. There's a lot of really sad stories and books written about a lot of this process too. But like Amy Coney Barrett was discussed to be, well, she's the woman, so she has to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And then that opportunity happened, but it was like seen to be that pretty much crude at many times as well. But it really is sort of the confluence, as Jen said, of all these different factors. I think Mitch McConnell's motivation and the reason why he will cater to more of the religious right on these issues is that concentration of those money interests, the corporate power, things like Citizens United, which has really flooded the elections with money that has benefited him and his party specifically over, the types of voices and votes of others who don't maybe have that much money or interest that they're able to put in influence in some of these elections. And so people do come to it all together, but they are able to come under this, small community of really conservative lawyers and jurists in order to accomplish this. But we have seen recently, especially given just the attacks on our Capitol earlier this month, we have seen this through even last January's impeachment process. We have seen this in the ways in which this administration has really attacked rule of law, that people have said, you are putting up with this for the judges. Why is that possible? When do you draw the line? And I think that just shows how much of a close hold that the judges in the federal judiciary project has in terms of really inexcusable other behavior. Certainly what I think they have done to the federal judiciary is inexcusable, but it has gone beyond that because of the judges. And I do think we're seeing more of a shift and a turn in that because of a lot of the efforts that have been happening amongst different organizations on the left and individuals really seeing just the raw power grab that happened and the reasons why and the way that is actually impacting people's day-to-day lives, whether that's what they're able to access health care with the Affordable Care Act and so on.
And Jen, in terms of what judges can do, from your reporting, were we close to having judges ruling in Trump's favor that could have thrown the election to him? And if the election were closer, could the judiciary have gotten Trump over the line?
So there were more than 60 lawsuits filed over the election results and filed in federal courts, and they all ruled against Trump. So I don't know the breakdown of may have been Trump judges, but that's a pretty significant losing streak. So I don't think that there was a real risk of Trump-appointed judges throwing the election to Trump, even though Trump may have been hoping that would happen. Beyond that, what was the second part of your question?
So it doesn't sound like there was much of a risk that happened that the judiciary did hold with the 60 lawsuits. But if the election results were closer, do you think the judiciary may have taken a different approach?
Well, again, it comes down to individual states, and every state has their own process for their elections, and they are in charge of counts, and they set the numbers where what decides a recount. And, would decide if there was something that was, carried out improperly or et cetera. So I don't think that the courts would have suddenly seized on all of these state level election results if it had been a little bit closer. I mean, if any state has very, very close election results, there's going to be all kinds of, for recount and maybe claims of fraud or, individual instances of something going awry and then blowing it up to, cause her whole redo of the election. But you have to remember that there's people at the local and state levels who have this job to make sure these elections go smoothly, make sure ballots are counted fairly, all the minutia that we don't think about. So, it comes down to local and state level on a lot of this stuff. And in that sense, Trump's judges wouldn't really have much of a hand in this. And it came down to one state deciding the whole election that was razor thin close result.
Right. That is comforting to know that there are more that we, for a lot of folks, we're able to see that there are more checks on a very authoritarian power in the system. And I think that that is comforting no matter how Trump did try to stack the deck in his favor. And then,
I think, not to interrupt you, that is really clear from how this election played out. Look at Georgia, where you had these Georgia Republican officials going on TV and basically condemning Trump and his team for what they're doing and putting their local election workers' lives at risk by, Trump going on TV and alleging there was widespread fraud in Georgia and basically directing his supporters to go after the local election officials in Georgia who didn't do anything wrong. In fact, they did everything they were supposed to do. There was no fraud, yet their lives are being threatened because Trump and his people are saying, look at all the fraud here, go to Georgia and go threaten these people's lives. So if anything, there were some, under-recognized moments of heroism of people who looked beyond party and were like, hey, man, stay out of our state, stay out of our jobs. We're doing this right. And this is about something bigger than.
That's a hopeful note. Hey, I'm going to jump in because we're about to run out of time. And I just want to say you should read Jen Bendery at HuffPost. You should check out Lena at, or the Fair Courts Project at, say your whole organization title so I don't get it wrong, Leadership Conference
on Civil and Human Rights.
Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And I want to just throw it to you guys if there's anything specific you've written or that you're working on that you want to plug or that you want people to check out before we say goodbye.
Well, I'll throw out that I wrote a piece last week about federal judges now announcing that they're retiring suddenly after Biden has become president. And it's a real trend here. Just a number of federal judges, the moment that Biden inaugurated, who announced their retirement because they knew that now Biden was not Trump. And it's pretty remarkable if you just see the numbers rolling in as they are right now, that there's a reason for a number of these judges just waiting until days, if not literally hours after Biden was inaugurated to announce their retirement. So it's a pretty notable pattern here that just how much some judges waited for Trump to leave in order to be replaced.
Oh, that sounds cool. I'm going to go read that right after we sign off. Lena?
Yeah, well, I recommend reading Jen. She has been following the federal courts probably more than most other, I would say any other, but just to caveat in case that we fact check it, other reporters on this, and has been incredibly diligent and able to get under so much of what's actually been going on the past few years, and I know we'll be doing so in the future. So I thank Jen for that. Highly recommend reading all of her articles so you can hear everything that's going on. The other things, obviously, please visit civilrights.org. That is the Leadership Conference's website, and you can go check out more information on our Fair Courts project. And if you really want to get into the weeds, I did write a law review article, so it's published on this. If you want to read a number of pages on this very specific topic about the Trump's takeover, the judiciary, I'm pretty sure you could just Google my name and Trump takeover, and you'll probably be able to find that in the University of St. Thomas Law Journal.
Oh, yes, I do want to get into the weeds. I am going to go read things. I want to thank you both so much for joining us for this conversation. You're both doing amazing work and totally know your stuff, and we were lucky to talk to you about this. And that concludes Ask an Atheist for this week, and I want to thank everybody watching this for joining us. And I want to just plug FFRF's broadcast TV program. Don't forget to check out Free Thought Matters. This week, Dan Barker Our co-president interviews ex-Muslim atheist activist Armin Navabi, whose web community called Atheist Republic gives ex-Muslims a place to meet up and share their stories. And we have a clip here. He's describing his parents' reaction when he decided to leave Islam.
A lot of ex-Muslims deal with religious parents. My parents had to deal with a religious teenager that couldn't shut up about Islam and how they need to stop drinking alcohol and pray and fast. So I actually remember that when I eventually became an atheist, I told my parents that I'm an atheist now. Their first reaction was, "Oh, thank God."
You can watch Free Thought Matters on TV stations around the U.S. on Sunday mornings, or you can check it out on FFRF's YouTube channel or our Facebook channel. Also, check out Free Thought Radio. It's FFRF's weekly radio show and podcast, ffrf.org/radio. If you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, as always, you can check out our website at ffrf.org. We will see you next time, same place, on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.